Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking what is genuinely a pivotal year ahead for a clinical stage biopharma company called EyePoint Pharmaceuticals. You know, if you follow the biotech space at all, you already know it's a sector completely driven by data and clinical readouts. And for EyePoint, well, the clock is ticking down to some absolutely massive milestones. We're going to break down the science, the market, and the financials so you get a crystal clear picture of exactly what's at stake here.
Okay, so let's jump right into the big question. Can one drug disrupt a $15 billion market? Because right now, iPoint is attempting this quiet, yet potentially massive transformation from a pre-revenue company into a total blockbuster player. They're essentially putting almost all of their chips on a single investigational treatment for severe vision loss. So the big question hanging over the stock is, does this one asset have the clinical muscle to completely upend a global market that's currently dominated by established, heavy-hitting therapies? To get to the bottom of that, here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The retinal disease market. 2. We'll meet Duravyu. 3. The financials and cash runway. 4. Wall Street's perspective. And 5. Those huge 2026 catalysts. All right, Section 1, the retinal disease market and that $15 billion opportunity. Let's look at the landscape. We're talking specifically about wet age-related macular degeneration, or wet AMD, and diabetic macular edema, known as DME. These are seriously debilitating chronic conditions. Basically, they cause fluid leakage and inflammation right in the back of the eye, which ultimately leads to severe vision loss. And listen, this isn't some niche medical issue. Together, these conditions make up a massive global market. We're talking branded treatments generating nearly $15 billion every single year. But here's the catch. Despite the sheer size of this market, the current treatments out there, they're far from perfect for the patients who actually have to use them. Which brings us to the core problem. The current standard of care, drugs like Eylea, require frequent, burdensome liquid injections directly into the patient's eye. Yeah, literally into the eye. Imagine having to go to a clinic every few weeks or months for that. It's incredibly taxing. In fact, surveys by the American Society of Retina Specialists show that long-lasting durability is consistently the #1 unmet need. Patients and doctors are just desperate for a treatment that extends the time between these uncomfortable doses. Moving on to Section 2, meet Duravyu and the science of sustained release. Let's see how EyePoint is actually trying to solve this. When we contrast the current standard of care with EyePoint's lead asset, Duravyu, we're looking at a potential paradigm shift. Instead of a large volume of liquid injected frequently, Duravyu is a tiny bioerodible insert. It's designed to deliver a steady, continuous release of medication over 6 full months. 6 months! And based on their pharmacokinetic data, this insert is 94% drug payload and fully bioerodes, meaning it just naturally dissolves inside the eye while it's doing its job. Pretty amazing, right? Now, the really crucial part here is how the drug itself works. Duravyu uses a highly targeted medicine called vorlanib. It's a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, or a TKI. See, older drugs usually just block one single pathway that causes fluid buildup. But vorlanib, it acts like a multi-tool. It simultaneously blocks multiple inflammatory pathways, specifically VEGF, PDGF, and IL-6. Those are the proteins responsible for triggering that fluid buildup and swelling inside the eye. Blocking all of them at once is exactly what gives it the potential to keep the eye drier for a much, much longer time. Of course, they have to prove it actually works in humans, right? So EyePoint is running a super robust roster of phase 3 clinical trials. They're actually running identical parallel trials for both diseases to de-risk the whole regulatory process. We've got the Lugano and Lucia trials for wet AMD, right alongside the Como and Capri trials for DME. These are head-to-head matchups against the current standard of care. The goal? To prove non-inferiority when it comes to vision retention while dramatically reducing that heavy treatment burden we just talked about. Section 3. Financials and cash runway. This is essentially a race against time, because developing drugs like this requires just a massive amount of capital. When we dig into their Q1 2026 financials, well, we see the harsh reality of being a clinical stage biotech company. EyePoint reported just $700,000 in net revenue. That's a steep drop from the prior year, mostly because a previous deferred revenue agreement wrapped up. Meanwhile, their operating expenses skyrocketed to $88 million. This really highlights the staggering cost of running 4 late-stage clinical trials all at once, plus scaling up a commercial manufacturing facility in Massachusetts. All of this translates to a net loss of nearly $85 million for just one single quarter.
But don't panic just yet. The most critical number here is $223 million. That was their cash position at the end of Q1. Despite that heavy cash burn we just looked at, management has guided that this $223 million gives the company a financial runway stretching all the way into the fourth quarter of 2027. That is absolutely crucial. It means they are fully funded to get past their major phase 3 data readouts without having to scramble to raise immediate capital. Now, to be totally fair and impartial, we've got to talk about the bear case presented by analysts. The risk here is incredibly concentrated. EyePoint is relying almost entirely on just one asset, Duravyu. And since they're burning through almost $85 million every quarter, if there's any trial failure, safety signal, or regulatory delay, well, they could run out of cash extremely fast. If the data comes back poor, trying to refinance or raise more money with a failed clinical asset would be devastatingly dilutive and incredibly risky for the company. Okay, Section 4, Wall Street's perspective. Let's see how the broader financial market is viewing all this binary risk.
So back on June 27, 2026, EyePoint was officially added to multiple Russell indices, including the Russell 2000 Growth and 3000 Growth benchmarks. This is a pretty big deal. It broadens their exposure to index tracking funds and quantitative investors. Now, does it change the underlying science? No, not at all. But it fundamentally reshapes their shareholder base and pumps up the trading liquidity of the stock just as they're heading into these make-or-break data readouts. And get this, we're seeing immense bullish sentiment from Wall Street analysts right now. Against a recent trading price of roughly $14.28, the average consensus target price projects a massive 183% upside, sitting at $40.54. Some analysts are even slapping a high target of $68 on it. Basically, the market is heavily discounting the stock right now because of that binary risk we talked about, but they see absolutely massive potential value if the upcoming Duravyu data is a hit. Actually, when you look at the consensus from the 13 major analysts covering the stock, they are in total alignment. 10 analysts hold a strong buy rating and 3 maintain a buy rating. 0 holds, 0 sells. It's incredibly clear that the financial community firmly believes the underlying science and the potential to totally disrupt a $15 billion market is well worth the preclinical risk. Finally, Section 5, the 2026 catalysts. Let's map out these binary events. The timeline ahead is just packed. August 2026, we get the top-line data from the Lugano wet AMD trial. Q3, they expect full enrollment for those DME trials. Fast forward to October, and the second wet AMD trial, Lucia, drops its data. The whole thing builds to this intense crescendo well before their cash runway expires in Q4 of 2027. EyePoint CEO Dr. Jay Duker said it best during a recent forum. He said, 2026 looks like it's going to be a transformative year. Looking at this timeline, you literally can't disagree. The sheer volume of impending phase 3 data is either going to launch them straight toward an FDA submission, or it's going to force them right back to the drawing board. So, we leave you with this final thought. The medical need for longer-lasting eye treatments is undeniably desperate. The science behind Duravyu is looking incredibly promising. But, as with everything in biotech, it always comes down to the raw numbers. Will Duravyu's final phase 3 data actually justify all of Wall Street's hype? Keep your eyes peeled for those August and October readouts, because they are going to give us the ultimate answer. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.